Toad for DB2 has some really good features for working with data for both DB2 on ZOS and DB2 LUW for developers and DBAs. Anytime you have a data grid, and right now I've selected a table, and on the right-hand side I've selected the data tab, so the data grid or the contents of the rows of that table are shown. You could interact with that grid in many various ways. So if I right-click on the grid, I could easily and quickly export the grid contents to an Excel file. It's going to prompt me and ask me if I want to read all the rows of the table. I'm going to say yes. And what that does is open up an Excel file, write to it, then close it, and you have the option of displaying that. So the Excel file gets created rather quickly, and you can see the column headers become headers in the Excel file sheet itself. You can export it, any data grid, into various other formats as well using the export wizard. So if you right click anywhere in a data grid and select the export wizard, this wizard comes up and allows you to select various different output formats. I'm going to select a comma separated values format right now. And you can see there are many options that you could specify as you are walking through this wizard, such as using column names for a header row, including the SQL statement, checking resources that are needed. You could get very granular and unselect columns that you might not want to export. And you could specify the location, whether or not you want to add like a datetime suffix to the file name or overwrite the file. I'm going to just give it a unique file name with an A at the end of it. Click next. And click next. Click finish. And Toad actually generates this new comma separated value file. And I'm just going to open that up in a different application so we can see what it looks like. Because if you double clicked it and open it up in Excel, it would look like an Excel sheet when in fact it's not. It's actually a delimited file. So very nice, nice type of file that Toad can create for you. All right, that's the file. And what are we going to do now? Is going to drive that export wizard one more time. So I'm just going to drive it and going to create a SQL script. So this actually is going to generate insert statements for each row of the table that you're exporting. And here you have the ability to, like if you wanted to create an insert script that might be used in a different table to populate data in a different table, you could override the table name here. But by default, I'm going to take all these existing values by default and just click next and give it a unique name here again. And Toad will generate the file. I'm going to open up the file containing that, and we'll see that again. I'm just going to open that file directory up and open up that file, and we'll see in Toad you can see that the file that was generated, it's a rather large file, but it's got all these insert statements and it's got the values clauses. So basically, here's a way, if you wanted to use this, to create insert statements for all the existing rows of a table. And that's the export wizard. There is an import wizard as well. I've got a team. I'm going to quickly create a clone of this table. And it'll be an empty table, and I'll show you how this works. All right, football team clone. And I'm just going to create this. So now we're going to have an empty table. And what I'm going to do is just quickly export the values from this existing teams table. Just run it to an export. Just going to export to a Excel file. Click on this, open the containing folder so I know where it's at, because I'm going to read that file next. All right. And so now what I'm going to do now is send this, right click on this and send this to the import wizard. And so the import wizard is going to prompt me for a file name. And I'm going to just basically add that file that I just created, which is right here. It's the most recent file here. And this is the file. So I basically selected that file once the import wizard came up, and it does a little sampling of that Excel file where it populates this grid, shows you some of the data, lets you select things such as, our empty fields now, which column to start at, because you don't necessarily have to start importing into your table from the beginning of an Excel spreadsheet. You can do it in the middle if you wanted to. So it gives you some options here. You walk through, it gives you a sample of what it thinks the column values are going to be as it's going to be imported. It allows you to map things. By default, it maps by position. You can map by name. So if your columns were ordered differently in your table than they were in your Excel spreadsheet, you could modify those. It allows you to select which table. By default, the table I selected is going to be used. You could truncate the table, which DB2 would remove rows from the table before they are inserted using this insert wizard. And you could add additional files and tables and execute those all in one execution of the import wizard. But for this example, we're going to go through one import wizard with one file to one table. And you can see very quickly and easily the rows that were in the Excel spreadsheet have been imported into our clone table. So Toad very easily can export data as well as import data. Toad also has a test generation feature to it as well. So if you have an empty table, you create an empty table, you want to populate it with some test data, you could use Toad to do that for you. So I have a table out here, and this table is empty. As you can see on the data tab, there's nothing there. If I right click and say generate test data, the test data generation dialog will occur. And at this point in time, I could select other tables to generate data for. So you could do that in one fell swoop with one execution of this wizard, but I'm going to keep it simple and only generate data for this one table. And it gives you options again. How many rows do you want to insert? I'm going to go 25 rows. Do I want to delete the existing rows before I do this insert? I'm going to say no. And we're going to continue. And now what this wizard allows you to do is it acknowledges what row types they are, and it gives you certain things, certain ways to generate data. So for example, the player ID, I could say I want it to be a sequential generate starting at 1, stepping by 1, and going to 1,000. Same with birth date, that's a random date. College, random values. Height, I could say the same thing. I basically might want a random generate starting at 66 inches and ending at 80 inches. For example, weight, when I get to the column weight, same thing, to be realistic, I could say, well, random starting at 150, ending at 355. And the same with salary. Minimum salary is 120,000. The maximum salary is 17 million. And so once you specify the types of generation you want for each column, you click next. I'm clicking send to editor and finish. So what Toad is going to do, it's going to generate insert statements using the values that I've selected, that I specified, and it's going to, once you run this, your table will be populated. I'm going to run it right now. It's going to insert 25 rows into that table. I go back to my table view here. I'm just going to refresh it, and you can see that my test data that was generated has been inserted into this table. So a very quick, easy way using Toad for DB2 ZOS as well as LUW to generate test data.